Good afternoon, Pathway people. Mr. Klein here. Today we are going to be talking about the triangle of death, which, contrary to popular opinion, is not actually a heavy metal band. It is a region in a northern province of Italy, which has a very large problem with waste management. A lot of toxic waste has been dumped in this area over the years, and it's surrounded on all three sides by mountains, which means that the vapor from the toxic waste, once it gets into the air, there's no way for it to escape because weather patterns are disrupted by the three mountains. So the question that we want to answer today is whether whether people living in the triangle of death have higher rates of cancer. So here's how we go about it. To answer this question, I'm going to read what's in the second green box. Researchers gather a large sample of people living in the province. Some live in the triangle of death, and others do not live in the triangle of death. Each subject is asked whether or not she has developed cancer at any time in his or her life. So we've got our raw data right here. What kind of study is this? This is a population study, right? We just contacted people and asked them 2 questions. And I want to make sure that you're aware that when you see TOD, we're not talking about someone named Todd. That means that the person lives in the triangle of death. And if you see not TOD, that means that is a person that lives in this same province, right here in purple, but outside of the triangular region. Now, the next thing that you have to think about carefully before you go and make yourself a data table or a two-way table is what is your explanatory and what is your response variable. And in this case, we believe that the region that a person lives in might influence whether or not that person has cancer. So region explains cancer. Therefore, I put region here and cancer here. Which brings us to the big part of our discussion, which is how can we use Google Sheets in order to create the two-way table for us? I created this two-way table, which has the conditional distribution for triangle of death, and then the conditional distribution for not triangle of death. And you can see ahead of time here that the cancer rate, the proportion of people that had a yes, is much higher in the triangle of death than outside of it. So let me show you how I made this. I'm going to delete the table. And here we go. Step number 1 is to highlight our data. And to go to data and select pivot table. I want to do it in an existing sheet, and I would like you to put it right here. So go ahead and get that set up and then hit OK. Now from here, what you do to create the pivot table is different than the other pivot tables that we have made this year. So listen carefully. 4 steps. Step number 1 is tell Google Sheets that you want the explanatory variable in the rows, which in this problem would mean we want the regions to be in the 2 rows of the table. We do this by going to rows and choosing the region. Okay, you'll see them pop up right here. Since I think that the triangle of death is the one that's going to have the higher cancer rate, I personally like to have it on top, though technically it doesn't matter. Will you be quiet, dog? Hi. Hey, sweetie. All right, so we got that. That's step number 1. Step number 2. Do you need to go outside? You just want to bark? These people do not want to hear you bark. Hang on, let me pause this. All right, crisis averted. Where were we? Yes, step 1, we had made the rows. Step 2 is different. You're going to come down to values. But when you get to values, you're going to choose region once again. Right? So this is different for categorical variables. When you choose region for a second time, what you're going to see happen over here is the table will show you the count or the number of our observations or our people that live in the triangle of death and the number that live outside of the triangle of death. Step 3, in your columns, you need to have cancer. So we're going to go to columns, choose cancer, and you'll see that the table becomes a two-way table. Now, my personal preference, if it's a yes-no question, like we have for whether or not you've had cancer, I like yes to go first, and the way that we can make that happen is just by changing this to descending. Okay. Now, the last step is we would like the conditional distributions. So we would like the first row, this one right here, to give us the percent yes and the percent no. And then this row right here to give us the percent yes and the percent no. And the way that we do that is we go back to values. This is step 4. And under values, we're going to choose percent of row. And there we have it. So there's your pivot table. We can see very clearly that there is an association between the region a person lives in and whether they develop cancer. People that live in the triangle of death have a much higher cancer rate than people that live outside of it. Now, another way to show that is to create a chart. So let's talk about creating a chart, which is going to be different here too. There's 2 options that you can get through Google Sheets. One is a stacked bar chart and one is a side-by-side bar chart. Google Sheets does not play nice when it comes to making pie charts, so we're not going to worry about those. Now, the first thing that's different here is you do not go and highlight the raw data. In fact, if you try to highlight the raw data like this, and then you click on chart, it will tell you there's nothing here for me to look at. Sorry, buddy. What you have to do is pick the numbers that are right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight region, triangle of death, not triangle of death, and then the percents that accompany it. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to choose insert chart. Okay, and it's going to give me, that is not exactly the chart. Why is it giving me region? I don't like that it says region. Hey, my Google Sheets was behaving just a little funny, so I moved to a new sheet. Here, you don't need to do this. But what you do is you highlight just everything but the totals. Don't highlight the totals. So there should be 4 numbers that you're highlighting, the yes and the no, the TOD and the not TOD. And then you're going to come here and you're going to choose Insert Chart. And it's going to give you a chart. And I've noticed that the chart that it gives changes on its whim, right? So this right here is called a side-by-side bar chart, right? For the triangle of death, they're giving you the percentage yes and the percentage no. And then for the not triangle of death, they're giving you the percentage yes and the percentage no. The other way that you can do this is rather than, they call that a column chart, you can do this one right here, which is a stacked bar chart. And that's what I asked you to do for this one. Stacked means that they're just going to layer the 2 percentages on top of each other. They should always add up to 100%. So this is the graph that you want to put in under, whatever number it was, letter it was. But, let's copy that. Now let's see here, right there. Let's paste it, and then shrink it down, just so you see how things can go goofy. Let's suppose that I instead highlighted the whole chart. Watch how we're going to get something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Okay, so now it gives me 3 percentages. It gives me yes, no, and the grand total. but we don't care. We know that the grand total is 100% for both of the rows, right? So we don't want that grand total in our data because it actually masks what's going on. It doesn't make sense. Same thing if we went to the stacked bar chart. Now it's going to make half of each one of them the grand total. That's not what we're interested in, so let's ignore. I'm going to delete you. Goodbye. Bye-bye. So let's conclude this by addressing the last question, which asks us whether the two variables are independent or associated. And as we talked about last class, if you see large differences, like here, look how much higher the cancer rate is amongst people in the triangle of death than people living outside of it, that means that there is an association. If the two variables were independent, this proportion and this proportion, or in other words, this proportion and this proportion would be about the same. So I said, yes, there is an association between the region in which a person lives and, it looks like I said whether the person develops cancer. People living in the triangle of death, spelling, Mr. Klein, have a much higher rate of cancer than those just living outside of it. Let's get those people some help.